Welcome to Psalm 77. It's a psalm set in the book of exile of the Psalms, and it does deal with this idea that not only is Israel potentially in exile, but the person who writes the psalm is in a spiritual exile. And he begins by reflecting on how he once did feel at peace with God, in love with God, secure with God, but like his nation Israel, he is in distress and is worried that the God whom he loved has somehow withdrawn his love from him, maybe like he has withdrawn it from the nation. And he uses the idea of being so distressed at night as he lies asleep, or wanting to be asleep. And it harkens back to a time when he did know the peace of God. And so distress is made worse, according to this psalmist, because the acuteness of it is so negative compared to the joy he once felt. Let me read a couple of verses right at the beginning, and I think you'll grasp the utter distress that this psalmist is going through. It says, "I cried to God for help. I cried to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out my untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint." He goes on to say he's lying in bed, and maybe you've done that too. You're lying in bed, and as you meditate, as you think about the day, as you start to have your worries burden you, nothing that you think of, nothing that you imagine gets rid of them, and you can't get to sleep. You cannot drift off. And he reflects at previous times and of hymns, of words of comfort from God, that as he meditated on them and as he sung songs to the Lord or remembered those songs of the Lord, he went to sleep like a baby. But now he lies awake, distressed, out of comfort. And he continues to speak in such a way that some of you who have been Psalm a Day may remember from previous Psalms like Psalm 13, where his experience, or what we call subjective reality, cannot bring him comfort. He needs to go back to a objective occasion, the reality of the Exodus, a truth and a miracle that his people have believed in for so many years, and that Exodus from a life of slavery gives him hope for two types of Exodus. Potentially the Exodus again from the slavery of the exile, and also the exodus of his own spiritual slavery, spiritual malaise and distress. And he wishes that he may feel God again. And his hope is in the power of God to do both. He done it before, he can do it again. He goes on in these verses. To begin with, he is dejected. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he again show his favour? And he is wondering whether this generation will be the generation like they were in the Exodus who did receive it. But of course, there were many generations who waited patiently but never received it. Will he be like that? He hopes not. He continues on. Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? He knows the answer must be no, but he doesn't feel it. He doesn't know it. He can't embrace a feeling that he does not know. And so he does what he knows is true. Embrace the covenantal love of God, even if he doesn't feel it. And he does it by reciting the truth that he knows is recorded in large swathes of the scriptures, especially the book of Exodus. And so verses 13, really until the end, continue to preach to himself the message of the miraculous past of Israel's absolute vindication by God because of God's power and might. And he wants that to be true for himself in a personal way and for his nation, no doubt, in a prophetic way. And I think this is a great teaching for us in two ways. Firstly, sometimes, as we've said in the past, like Psalm 13, you don't currently feel the experience of God's love and you see no way out. How are you going to get out of it? God says, continue to bring your distress in meditation to him. Continue to bring it. You don't feel like it, but actually it's your only hope. Because in God's power is the way out. He provides a path for us to get out. Like that parting of the Red Sea, he will one day part your spiritual malaise and remove the distress in order for you to worship him. I don't know how he will do it in your life, but do it he will. Because that is the power that God has. If we continue to bring our distresses before him, he will continue in time to bring us through them. And the second thing is, we have a miraculous exodus given to us in the scriptures. And I'm not talking about the second exodus in the Old Testament. I'm talking about the third exodus in the New Testament. And that is the exodus from spiritual slavery to sin spoken of by Jesus Christ. It's the exodus of death. It's the exodus of judgment. It is the removal of our exile from God himself. And it's what God did through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus came to earth and embarked upon an amazing miracle of removing the judgment for sin. And then he exited this world, but did not leave us. He gave us his Spirit in order that in our distress we would call upon him, yes, but even more so, in our utter distress of sinful judgment, we would call out to him and be saved from sin. If you haven't done that before, do it now. If you've done it, continue to cry out to him, not for salvation this time, but for help, for need, and for sustenance. For the power that saved you is the same power that will get you through today and tomorrow. It's the power of Jesus Christ. Call out to him. Sometimes you do that when you don't feel like it. Sometimes you do it when you don't believe you can be helped. But the time and a time process of doing so, because you believe in God, because you believe in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection are true, much like the psalmist, he called out to the miraculous power he believed in about the parting of the Red Sea, even though it's 500 years back in time. We are like that. We call out sometimes because we trust in the truth of Jesus' death and resurrection, even though we currently don't feel its power. And we hope and trust that God, by his Spirit, will engender those feelings in us once again. So call out to Christ and ask him by his Spirit to help you trust in Jesus Christ, that truth that is objectively true, and that one day, maybe today and or tomorrow, you will subjectively feel that experience so weigh so beautifully upon your heart that you will once again give glory to God.